Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast, where we're all about creating your path to impact. Join your hosts, Dixie Mary Carlton from Indie Expert Publishing and Mr. Web Marketing Brad Houck, as we look at how you can grow your business and influence by leveraging your knowledge for profit. In this episode of the Expert's Journey podcast, we explore what it means to have a truly authentic voice in your writing and your speaking. Whether you're creating content, presenting on stage, or posting online, sounding like yourself builds connection and credibility with your community. We walk through some simple ways to define your unique voice so that it stands out clearly and consistently in everything you do. Good morning, Dixie.
Good morning, Brad. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How's things in your neck of the woods?
Very quiet and peaceful, which is good, but it's going to be a crazy week.
Ah, that sounds excellent. Defining a unique voice is something that I think everybody has to come to terms with, because it's one thing to get up on stage and be a little robotic and read what you're saying, but eventually you've got to come up with that look and feel so that you're comfortable in what you're doing, what you're writing, and what you're saying, because otherwise you're either being an imitation of yourself or you're not fully embracing what it means to be you to your audience.
Great concept for us to discuss this morning. And it follows on really well from what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago with regard to branding and personal branding. And I was given some advice a few years ago about ditch the notes, think about whether you're having a conversation with the person who is sitting across from you at a dinner table and you are just talking about what you know. And I thought that was brilliant advice. Now, obviously, that's a very simplistic way of looking at what we do on stage. But if you think about the fact that you're up there because you know your content, you know your topic inside out. If you had to ditch the PowerPoint or for some reason there was a power cut and you couldn't do anything more than just talk to the people in your room, then what would you have a conversation about? And not times it will be about the same things that you get asked about when you are sitting meeting someone for the first time in a dinner party situation or a networking event. So how would you be different there than what you might think of being different on stage? And is there a difference?
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think you have those conversations at dinner parties and you talk your way. And I often see people, and I know I do this myself, where someone asks you a question about something you're passionate about, something you like or you know about, and you drift off into this geeky like blah about it. And
Who are you?
but that's the real you. That's like how you feel about it. If someone's asked me about web marketing and I start going down the rabbit hole, it really is the way I am about that. And I think if you can take a little bit of that and bring it to stage, you can be so much more animated. And if you reflect that in your writing as well, it becomes more you rather than a book written by somebody, for example.
I came across this situation just a week or so back where someone had written their content for a particular book that we're putting together. And it's a multi-author contribution book. And this particular person kept referencing everybody else or other people that they had read. And I can say, you're in this book because you know this content. You should be referencing yourself. You should be standing on the power of what you have already developed over the years as an expert in this field. You don't need to reference everybody else if you already own your subject and you own it to the point that you have written about it, you speak about it, you have been awarded perhaps for it or recognized in some way for your content. Own your own stuff and write from that perspective or speak from that perspective more than just referencing everybody else who you've learned from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a time to reference people. In other words, give acknowledgement to people that you're referring to in your speech or your writing. But that should be short. If you think about from academic writing, you can't use more than, say, 2 sentences and they must be referenced properly. So that's fair enough. But if you're doing academic writing, you wouldn't write all of your thesis and have it mainly what other people have said about the topic. You might do that in the research section of it. So it's the same in anything else. Yeah, it's great to quote people because I think it backs up your perspective, your point of view. But in the end, you'll develop your own Bradisms, as you like to call them, and you should be using that because that's your way of looking at it. Why then does trying to sound like everyone else hurt your message?
Because it's everybody else's message being quoted by you rather than you talking about what you have to say on the subject. And it's really that simple. You just mentioned Bradism. And I'm a big proponent of saying, if you've got specific ways of saying things that stand out, whether it's what you write or whether it's what you speak about, you should identify those particular catchphrases that you can make your own. You should also consider even registering some of those as trademarkable. And this is not a conversation about trademarking, but you should definitely register your copyright with some of those things that are uniquely, specifically yours. Often when people are writing a book or putting a presentation together, they'll quote Henry Ford or Oprah or whatever. Why not quote you? Why not develop some of your own specific ways of saying something that's really powerful and do that? Like one of mine is, for example, when you stand in your power, you light up dark corners. Now, that's a way of saying when you own your content and you speak from a position of strength, then you can light up other people's minds or you can enhance other people's thinking about what you do. Now, saying
Yeah.
all of that in a long version is not as powerful as saying and putting on a slide, when you stand in your power, you light up dark corners. That's my own saying. So think about some of your own versions that you can be known for and get other people to start quoting you. That's more powerful. That's owning your own authenticity on the subject that you're an expert in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is too, sometimes people, when they start out speaking, they compile their speeches on what other people are saying. So, they'll see a certain person telling a certain story and they think that's a great story. I should use that. Instead of taking their own stories and their own voice, they're compiling a speech, which you don't get paid to compile information from other people. That's not why you get on stage. And as I said, while you can reference other people, you need to be unique. And I think that's the key thing. It's only when you let go of what other people have said, you take that information inside of you and you reinterpret it in your own voice and use your own stories to actually word it, that you really can change the way people perceive the same message. Because in a lot of cases, the message is the same. We're just putting it in our own voice, our own way of doing it.
That brings me to a really interesting point as well, where you're talking about storytelling. Now, story makes the fact sticky. Now, I'm reading a book at the moment by a man called Carmine Gallo, who is a brilliant storyteller and writes about writing stories and speaking with stories. And well worth grabbing a copy of this book if you're really interested in this particular area, because he talks about the fact that when you are writing your own stories, you are speaking from a place of authenticity, which is exactly what we're saying. But you have to write your own stories. You have to share your own version of how things happened or are happening, or your own case study, which is a great area that AI cannot touch you on. So you are the only one who can tell your story. So create a way to tell your stories that give impact to the message that you're trying to make. They're your own stories, and they're the way that you want people to understand the points that you're trying to make. It's that simple.
Exactly. And it comes down to those simple ways of writing and speaking so people feel that they know you. And one of the quickest ways is through story. Another way, I think, is using the word you when you're writing an article or even a book. I prefer to actually talk to the person who's reading it rather than talking in whatever the other voice is called, third person or something. But I actually prefer to talk to the reader and try and make a connection and kind of say, in your business life, I've no doubt that you will have been through times where, and building in that kind of connection by talking directly to the person. And it's the same on stage. You might be talking to a large group of people, but what you're trying to do is actually reach directly into the minds and hearts of each individual person. So you really got to think about things that are common to every person's life or every person's business or whatever your topic is, and then pick on those specific things so that people can then relate to that.
Yes. Now, there is a ratio that we talk about in terms of the IU ratio. You should be a 3-to-1 IU ratio. So every time you say I, you should be saying you twice as often, or so 3 times as often. So the 3-to-1. So 1/4 of your messaging should be, or writing should be saying, yes, I do this, or when I did this, or my situation. But 3 times more often, you should be saying, and when you have this situation, or when you go down this path, or when you experience it. So getting that ratio right when you're writing and speaking is also a powerful way to retain that level of authenticity and telling stories and being involved and immersed in the audience, not just making it all about you.
Absolutely. And when you're writing content, obviously we're publishing to all different platforms these days. So we've got what we do on stage, and then we've got what we're doing in LinkedIn, and what we're doing on Facebook, and what we're doing in Twitter or X or Threads or Instagram. There's so many different platforms.
Mhm.
And keeping a consistent voice across all those platforms can be really hard. One of the things that I've really dug into is using video. And I've just started recording some videos, which I'm pushing out each day now as reels, because I think it's one way that I can actually use each platform individually, but keep my message the same across all of them because it's the same video.
Yeah.
I think that's a different way of looking at it from my perspective, but also I like doing the videos. So I've set myself up to do that, and I'm recording and cutting them. And they're only 60 seconds to a minute 20 long, but at least I'm getting that consistency across.
Mm.
But if I was to write a full article, I would really need to think about, do I record this article and then write it out based on the way I speak? Or do I bullet point it and write it from scratch? Sometimes it's hard writing content and keeping you in it without stripping back to old school writing and academic writing, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about being authentic from a physical perspective on stage, because there are a number of speakers that we both know who are either very jovial and very animated on stage, or versus some who will just stand there and very quietly and calmly deliver their presentation. And I think sometimes we forget that how we are on stage and off stage also needs to be the same in terms of the body language we use. I talk a lot with my hands. I know we're only doing a video at the moment and you can't see my hands, but I'm still sitting here using my hands to express myself to the computer. And that's what I do
That's
on
your Italian
stage.
background.
My Italian, yeah. If I was going to stomp on that or not use that as part of my presentation, people that know me would look and say, oh, she's so stiff. She's not normally like that. And that it takes also more thinking time to try and be different than what you normally would behave like on stage. So you have to think about how you appear in terms of your body language and the energy you bring to the stage. You can't just be one way on stage and one way off. There is an exception to that, however. I know that some people who are very much introvert can be on stage, and Robin Williams is apparently one of those guys, and we know a comedian in the GSF who is also like this, very animated on stage, but very calm off stage. But you still don't want to be standing on who you are physically and visibly to get your message across. You don't want to completely change your personality.
Yeah, look, it is hard, and it's well known fact in the industry that most great speakers are introverts. They turn it on when they're in public, and they can do that quite comfortably without putting on an act. But it's like all their energy goes into the performance, and then the time they spend with people at the conference or wherever they're speaking. And then when they leave, they go home and crash out for an hour with it all.
Yeah.
That's pretty common. I know myself, I would probably consider myself an introvert, and yet most people that meet me wouldn't say that about me at a conference or if I was speaking. But in true life, I am. I'll walk into the room and I will stand there silently by myself. But that's okay. And there's a difference between doing an act and just upping up your energy. And I think that's the difference. As an introvert, you're going to up your energy for stage and when you're doing video and presenting and things like that. But when you're off, you let your energy levels drop. And I know that happens a lot, but trying to keep yourself as people perceive you, I think that's the key, is your energy level comes up, but you, what underlies you, your personality, what makes you laugh, the stories, your background, all of that doesn't change. So if you can bring that, but up the energy level, you can keep yourself the same because your thinking's the same, your story is the same. It's just your energy is lifted and then dropped again.
That's right. Billy Connolly and Michael McIntyre are two great examples of high functioning, high energy comedians who will be full on stage. Now, could you imagine them trying, though, to drop that energy? So it also works in reverse. If you are a high energy person, you have to not stand on that. You have to think about people being concerned if you suddenly are just standing there and not exuding that high level of energy, if that's what you normally function like as well.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's the thing, depending on your personality type, you need to bring that to the stage. And some of that comes down to stagecraft too, I think. It's like when you stand up and you've got to speak, but you don't have a microphone in your hands and you're like, what do I do with my hands? You put your hands here or you hold your hands here or whatever it is, but you actually need to learn those things. When you take a photo, where do you put your hands when you take a photo? You can't put them behind your back, can't put them in front of you. They should just hang by your sides, just over your pockets almost, if it's just a straight photo. But it feels very uncomfortable to do that. So it's a learned sort of behavior that you're applying. And I know when I'm on stage, I haven't often used a mic that comes over my ear. I really like that because it frees up my hands. But in the end, I always have a clicker in them anyway. So it's a bit like either way, I'm hamstrung on one side. Sometimes you've got a mic and a clicker and you're going for it on both sides. And it makes it hard to point and do things. So you've got to do it often enough that it becomes natural and you don't have to think about it so much.
One of the things that I remember turning up to start learning in terms of stagecraft early in my career was, I think, Patricia Fripp, who was quite famous for doing speaker training back in the day. She used to do things like she would stand in one position and then if she wanted to make a specific point, she would step forward on the stage. And then she would talk about moving to the side and remembering to anchor your various points to specific places that you stand on the stage. And then someone said, everyone tries to do that. So you go through one of those types of boot camps or training programs. And then someone pointed out that, but that's not how I function. So why would I try to do that? I am better to forget about trying so hard to stand in the right space and just allow myself to be present in what I'm talking about, and therefore allow where I'm standing and the natural stagecraft to just kick in anyway. So it's not about just having natural stagecraft. You still need to learn the ropes, but you don't have to work to that level of formula to be the puppet appearance type person on stage.
Yeah, I think you need to be authentic in yourself on stage, but there's a place to bring in those bits of stagecraft and just make those subtle changes rather than standing behind a lectern, move out to the center of the stage and realize that if you move here, you're in the past and here you're in the future. There's a few little ones that you can use that are natural. And I think it's really interesting when I record video and I'm sitting like this, for example, where I'm talking to a camera and I'm recording, I'm sitting down. So my body's actually locked in place. And that's really inauthentic for me because I don't stand still when I'm on stage. I wander all over the place. And so you see the difference in someone, even when you're talking about using their voice, the voice that you get when you sit still and you record a video compared to, say, when you stand up and record a video and you zoom out a little bit is completely different. So be aware that, your voice, your tone, all that carries through your writing and your presenting can be changed even by how you're controlling how you're delivering it with sitting rather than standing and not having depth between you and the camera or being on a stage compared to being on a floor in a little tiny business breakfast meeting or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. There is that you need to learn in terms of stagecraft, voice modulation, being authentic, using the right equipment. But I think everything comes down to the most fundamental part of being a professional speaker or communicator of messages. Get your message clear and be true to who you are and what you are trying to do with sharing that message. That's the first part. It's all part of your branding. It's all part of your messaging. And as Keith Abraham, my favorite guy, who says these things, one of my favorite Keithisms is you can't go there till you grow there. You can attend boot camps, you can do all of this training, but you still have to grow into the role of what you are trying to do to become fully authentic and perceived as fully authentic. You can't do it overnight. Overnight success
Exactly.
takes 1,000 nights. That's the truth of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of that topic. So thanks again for joining us on the Expert's Journey podcast. If you've learned something useful in this episode, take a second to subscribe, share it with a fellow expert, and leave a quick review. It really helps us reach more people. And don't forget, check out our latest books on Amazon, Dixie's Start with a Draft, How to Easily Plan and Write a Nonfiction Book, and my AI-Powered Profits, How to Use AI to Automate and Accelerate Your Business in 90 Days. Both are packed with tools to help you grow your audience. We'll catch you in the next episode.
See you soon. Bye.